I was a really good employee. I was super capable and reliable, and in many positions got promoted to manager roles. But why did I burn out so badly 4 times that I left those jobs without another one lined up? This video is my story around that and my kind of hindsight wisdom as to what I think was going on there and how that's all connected to where I am today in my entrepreneurial journey with my business. So, first, I'm going to walk you through the 4 jobs. There are 4 very different jobs. Sometimes you leave a job from burnout and you think, oh, well, maybe if I do something totally different or in a different sector or whatever, it'll be different, right? Um, but alas, we bring ourselves and our nervous systems with us. So, my first job isn't going to be a traditional job, but it was my longest and deepest and probably most impactful burnout experience that I've mentioned in many other videos. But it was my time in the convent as a nun. And I'm going to try to give the the briefest clips of these 4 jobs that I can. But as we all know, brevity is not my strong suit. So if you want to 1x me or 2x me, feel free. But I do always enjoy talking about, convent life. So I was a nun. I was a nun from age 22 to age 30. And contrary to what you see in a lot of movies, the religious life or life in the convent that I chose to belong to was a very active missionary lifestyle. So we were not like cloistered away, just praying in silence all day, like you sometimes see in, Hollywood. Um, we were out with the people all day. Our schedule was go, go, go from the moment we woke up until the moment we went to bed. We were moving. We were moving and grooving. We were cooking and cleaning in the house. We were out with the people. We were hosting youth retreats. We were going here, there, and everywhere, traveling a lot. I always used to say, I felt like we were a band of gypsies. We would just like pile a bunch of the nuns' snacks, sleeping bags into a van and go from wherever we were in Harlem up to Connecticut or to the retreat house in upstate New York to run a weekend retreat or whatever we were doing. It was a lot of motion. And at the same time, as I've also said, there were zero boundaries, right? So there was no really saying no to the things. You had said yes to the life, and if as long as you were kind of physically capable, which I was, I mean, I was like a healthy, robust 20 something. There was no saying no. And so it was a very full, active religious life for 7 years. And I left it, in the beginning, it's fun and it's like an adventure and stuff. But when I left in 2011, I was so bad. I was like I was like a shell of my former self. The burnout was so bad. And the burnout wasn't just physical. You know, I can go into other aspects of it in other videos if people want, but it was definitely partly the physical and mental like exhaustion from being on all the time, doing ministry all the time, having tons of responsibility, just like you would in any kind of corporate role where you're super capable and you're great at what you do, and they just keep giving you more responsibility and more people to be in charge of and more events to host and run, etc. Right? So even though the outfit the uniform may be different, it's probably similar experience to what other people may experience in their like, kind of corporate type of a role. And so yeah, came home deeply burnt out. I think that really impacted my nervous system, even until today. I've healed a lot of it, but there was a lot. So that was one. So I left that, had nothing lined up, of course, because like what you don't just like, well, maybe some people leave religious life and go right into a job, but I did go home for only a few like weeks, and then I quickly got a job as a teacher. So next job, I was a Spanish and religion teacher, K through 8 in a Catholic school. So it was like a good transition job for me. And in that role, as one knows, it's more kind of a known thing. As a teacher, you're just on all day, right? Or you're on like 6 out of 8 periods or 6 to 7 periods out of 8. And because I taught Spanish and that was like a kind of a, you know, it's not a real class. So I had to move throughout the building. I took my Spanish supplies and visited each grade. So I was also like a missionary teacher, I guess. I was going to each classroom. So I didn't really have a classroom of my own. At one point I did share one. But only some classes came. Anyway, all of that to say, I think I lasted there 3 or 4 years. I taught Spanish and religion to both fifth grade classes. So in the end, it was a full-time job, teaching job. And I was there for 3 years, but it was great. I love the kids. I still am connected to a lot of them on the socials and just watching them become adults in the world. And it's great. It's nothing against the kids there or anyone who I was with. It was just 3 or 4 years of being on and exposure like that all the time, 5 days a week, um, drained me. And so my last year, I remember the last summer, towards the end of the school year, I was having such a hard time going into work. One day I just cried all the way there. I pulled into a Lowe's parking lot. I called out sick and I drove all the way to the shore and like stayed at a family friend's shore house for just the afternoon. And I just like cried in bed. I mean, that's how bad, again, it was. And then, of course, I told my principal that summer that I wouldn't be coming back next year and that I just couldn't do it anymore. And that was the truth. I just couldn't do it anymore. And so I did not have a job lined up when I left that. So that would have been in June of 2015. And so that summer then I needed to really downshift. So I looked for an easy job, which really I'm a believer that taking a low stress or low stakes job definitely has an important role in our healing process from anything. Sometimes you just need to not be stressed at work or just kind of have a different level of stress, I guess. So I took a job at a juice and burrito bar. It's like a juicing bar, and they also had food like burritos and salads and stuff. It's kind of like marketed as like, a healthy, fresh food place, which it was. And that was like very kind of aligned with how I live and all of that. So in the beginning, it was great. I was learning how to juice, all the recipes, all of that. And then, of course, within like 1 month of working there, they asked me to be a shift manager. So then my responsibility went up. And as anyone knows who works in those types of places, there's probably a lot of turnover. You're working with mostly people in their 20s. So the managers in those places tend to be the people in their 30s, right, or older. So, looking back, I understand why they chose me, even though I was like brand new. But yeah, I was like 34 working in a juice bar. That was like the reality of it. So I became a shift manager, and I think that job only lasted about 6 months. I quit sometime in the winter, maybe in January. That job was too overstimulating for me because even though it's not like teaching where you're the sole focus, you are peopling all day, right? You're serving people at the register, you're making juices. There's definitely meal rushes, whether it was breakfast, lunch, or dinner, whatever shift I had, sometimes two in a shift, lines of people, right? So one day I remember after a lunch shift, and I'm someone who, when I get super overstimulated too much, I just kind of get paralyzed. I kind of freeze. My brain like short circuits. I cannot function. So it's not great in a high stress situation where you need to be moving quickly, thinking quickly, and serving things quickly. So I had like a collapse moment, I think at a lunch rush. And after it was over, I like ran outside to the back of the house, outside to a tree, and I just cried and then came back in. And I told my manager, Devin, who was, whenever he was there, he was like the manager, right? So I was a shift manager if no one else was there. which was usually the evening shift. So this was like an afternoon shift, and Devin was there, and I just was like, I can't do this anymore. It's the same line everywhere. I can't do this anymore. And so I put in my 2 weeks, and he was sad to see me go. I mean, I loved Devin. He was a great guy to work with, and I'm sure he felt the same way. And I was like, I just can't sustain. I'm no good in these moments. I just collapse, and I'm done. So quit that job. And after the juice bar, I long story short, I ended up booking a one-way flight to Arizona, which is where my dad and stepmom lived. It's kind of my second home. Thinking, oh, I'll just take like a rest and or maybe see if I can do life out there. It was kind of this open-ended free spirit moment. And so I went out there, again, no job lined up or anything, kind of to take a break, but also wanted to poke around and see. I kind of felt like my kind of people and places might be out there more so than what I was experiencing in New Jersey. I had been home from the convent, as a sidebar, home from the convent for about 4 or 5 years by then, and really hadn't found much in the way of a community or friends or anything. So I was like, maybe I try somewhere else. So I get out to Phoenix. Within a few weeks, I think I got a very part-time job at a yoga studio, which was great. And I did make friends there. And that was actually super low stress. It was like check in 5 people on a Saturday. It was like nothing. But then within a month, I got a job at the Phoenix Center for the Arts, which is a nonprofit art center. And I was there for 3 years, and it was a great job. I loved it. It was kind of my first time um, on my own. I eventually also got my own place. So I had a full-time job, had my own place. I was living about 20 minutes, give or take, from my dad and stepmom out there, but I was creating like my own life. And the art center was a super cool place to work. I had a great team. Um, I was the patron services manager, which is the front fancy word for the front desk girl who's in charge of anyone who's at the front desk, because we had volunteers and stuff. So and I was on the marketing team and all this stuff, and it was great, but it was also still a lot of front facing. So I was at the front desk, not all the time. We did have volunteers, but I was the default, and I did have my own shifts at the front desk. So this is a huge art center. There's thousands of students. There's a whole visual arts department, painting, ceramics, the whole nine, glass. Then there's a whole performing arts department, all the dances, theater, etc. Thousands of students, instructors coming in and out the door all the time. It was also kind of open to the public. It was at a park, so random people walking. I mean, just like visitors, business meetings. There were businesses who had offices there. It was a lot of exposure to humanity at that front desk. And for a while, I did have the bandwidth for it. And I think I was high on the perks of having my own place and kind of creating my own life there, and finally having some friends and all of that. That kind of buoyed me for a while there. But again, it does eventually catch up to me. So after 3 years there, ironically, I had asked for, this is a sidebar, but it's very related and ironic. I always had to be on site. That was like part of my role. I never had the option to work virtually. And so as I was contemplating leaving, I was like, let me just ask for some accommodations and see what they do. It can't hurt to ask, right? So I already knew because I would see my coworkers work from home. Everyone else literally, essentially, could work from home on the staff when they wanted to. They didn't always choose to. Not everyone was as sensitive as I was. Lots of people liked coming into the office to work, but they would work from home if they needed to. And so I asked for the accommodation of being able to work home every other Friday. And I was denied that accommodation. I understand why. I have no hard feelings to anyone there. I love them. We had a great season there. But the irony is that the following year it was COVID. So I left. And then the next year it was COVID. And then everyone went virtual, including the guy in my position who I trained to be there. So, and I get it. It's because, no one's going into the building. But it was just funny. And it was a hard thing to hear. But, when they couldn't accommodate me, and I knew I couldn't be there 5 days a week, full time, full on peopling, I had to leave. And I was getting miserable again. I was having this time physical symptoms of anxiety going into work. I was getting cryy, which is always a sign, very low tolerance for things, didn't care anymore. All of those are signs that like my bandwidth has been used up and I don't have any more. And so, in these, so those are the four big jobs. And so again, I left the art center. That was have been the spring of 2019, no job lined up. So I just have to leave. I get to a point, I stay too long, probably. I don't heed the signals early enough. And then it comes to a point where it becomes like an emergency and I need to just leave. But the art center, it wasn't like terribly bad, but I also needed a breather. That was another thing. I did have some money saved up. I could afford to take a little bit of time to find another job. So that was like an advantage. Um, but yeah, I wasn't like, wait, I can't leave until I have one lined up. I just needed to leave and breathe and recover for a little bit before I were to go back and figure out another thing. I also was like, what the heck am I going to do? But at that time, that is when I started thinking, wait, I could do everything I do at the art center, essentially all this admin support for people, but I could do it as a virtual assistant. I think that spring, probably on YouTube, was the time when I learned even what a virtual assistant was and did. And I was like, wait, I can do that for a business owner. Like, I'm like very savvy with a lot of this stuff. Um, why don't I just take what I do at the art center, which is serving thousands of people this way, and channel it into serving a business owner directly? It would be so much less stimulation, right? It would just be me reporting to the one person and kind of being able to work from home. So that's kind of what started to percolate for me at that point. So I did that spring. I made my website. I started marketing a little bit. I did get a few clients, and I've talked about that in other VA videos, but my goal was to work from home for sure and try to work less hours on the computer. So that's my very like short, long version of those four jobs. And you can see how different they are, but what they all had in common was I was very exposed to people almost all the time. I was peopling all the time. There was a lot of energy exposure, noise, right? Think about being a teacher, being in an art center, even being a nun, I was living in Harlem for 4 years, you're around kids a lot, just a lot of stimulation. It was a lot. So, yeah, but what was frustrating, so here I am, I'm in my 30s, this whole decade. This is essentially the decade of my 30s, from late being a nun to leaving the art center in 2019. I was like 39. Yeah. And the struggle, though, was so frustrating because it's like, I know I'm good at all of this stuff that I've been in. Like, I could cry talking about it, right? Like, I know I'm great with kids. I know I'm great at a front desk, greeting people, answering questions. I know I'm great organizing really a lot of detailed information into digestible information for people. All the things I had done, or even like, whatever, making a juice fast. All the things I learned. It wasn't a problem with my capability of doing something and doing it well in whatever role. Even as a nun, I was an excellent nun. I mean, you can ask anybody, like that was the problem, was I always say like I aced the program. Like I like graduated because it was like, yeah, it's under our belt. Like we did the thing. And I didn't mention this before, but as a nun, I was promoted to Mother Superior. So at age 27, this is very normal for my order, even though it's not the most wisest thing, sidebar, for religious orders in general, but I was in charge of the nuns in my house in Harlem for 4 years. So again, it was like I was a good example. I was doing the work well. I was like a model employee essentially in all of these jobs and like super capable. And as anyone who else is a highly sensitive person or even neurodivergent many of us are accelerated learners, and I have been my whole life. I learn things quickly, quicker than most. And so it's like, no wonder you're good at your job. No wonder you get asked to be promoted. No wonder people trust you, with responsibility. And it's like, great. And so it was such a paradox to me that I was so great. Things came easy. I was trusted and promoted. And yet I couldn't sustain it. I would die every time. And it was sad. I cried a lot. I cried a lot of times in between those transitions because the search for trying to land something that can support you long term, it was getting tiring and frustrating. And it was like, what the heck is wrong with me? You know? Um, and I didn't know it then. I didn't know then what I know now. And so like looking back and reflecting, like back then I had um hints or teasers of what I needed. I knew I needed to work from home, right? So I made that a priority. I didn't know all the behind the scenes of my nervous system back then, right? I didn't know about overstimulation or bandwidth. I knew about highly sensitive person, but I didn't have what I was missing back then, which would have helped put it into so much context, was the nervous system education piece, which I learned a lot of nervous system from Irene Lyon. If you don't know her, she's on YouTube. Go find her. She's great. She's like the GOAT, I think, of like modern teaching of this stuff, but she takes from like the OGs of it. But she always talks about how nervous system work isn't just doing the work. It's actually education, understanding. That's like a huge piece of it, understanding the nervous system. And also the irony is I grew up in a medical family, and I've said this before, but it's like my dad was a doctor, my grandfather was a surgeon, my uncle's a dentist, my mom and aunt are nurses. Like I grew up, and my mom is also massage therapist, Reiki practitioner. So I have like holistic and conventional medicine background, like living and breathing in my blood and brain and bones, and understand a lot deeper than most of your like average people, right? Because of the family I grew up in. However, even from that whole tapestry that I grew up in, was missing nervous system stuff. So I'm going through all these burnouts, struggling to understand what is wrong with me. Why can I not hold this down? And, would have really helped to understand nervous system stuff back here. I think it would have put it into a lot of context, and it would have helped me not to feel crazy and not to feel like I'm failing and like I'm going to have to be doing this, switching of jobs forever, because it's just like I just can't sustain one thing for more than a few years. So yeah, I would say like what I realized, so it wasn't the main like crux of all of this was looking back now on my journey of all of that. What I realized was not that there was anything wrong with me, not that I didn't have the capacity to hold those positions or any of that. It was just that my nervous system couldn't sustain that role. Just because I had the capability of doing a role, whatever the role was, and I could do the role really well, is not the same thing as having capacity to sustain that role long term, right? So I could do these front facing things for a few seasons. And then it was like I had built up, or I had used out, depleted all of my bandwidth or capacity. And then I would just tank and collapse. And that happened over and over again. That was my pattern. So, but had I known back then more about nervous system stuff, I could have caught the pattern sooner and gotten out sooner, but that's okay. Here we are. So eventually I just started following the clues that I had to work with. I knew I needed to work from home and not be around people all day. That was my biggest drain, really, was having to people all day in all of those positions, whether it was phone, live, etc. So working from home, which I did the next like year essentially, as a VA, was key. And so I haven't worked a full-time 40-hour job since then. That was 2019. We are in 2026. I have not gone back to any 40-hour a week job since then. And I have not burned out. So to me, that tells me I'm doing something right. How I have sustained myself since then has been a blend. So that's the other piece of this is like, if you're in those positions and you're looking to get out or maybe start a side gig or this, it doesn't have to look one way. My entrepreneurial journey and my journey of getting out of the traditional 9 to 5 or 40-hour work week to where I am now has rolled over and looked very different. I've had at times very part-time jobs from as little as 12 hours a week. Like that was my next thing in Phoenix. When I left the art center, I got a 12-hour a week front desk job. I've talked about this many times for a chiropractor. It was just him and me in the office. He had 1 or 2 patients at a time. It was great. It was no problem. It was a small local business. It was lovely and I could sustain it. It was 3 days a week, like 4-hour shifts. It was great. And then even when I came to New Jersey, I had part-time jobs that were 25 hours a week, fully virtual. So and then in addition to that, ever since then, I also have always been house sitting, coaching, right? Doing one-on-ones and a little bit of VA on the side here and there. So there's always been a blend, but for me, figuring out that blend and doing the work to juggle those different, it's like a braid, right? Those different like threads of how I'm supporting myself has been so much more spacious and breathable and sustainable than having to go into a 40-hour a work. I can't say that phrase. Sorry, 40-hour work week. 5 days a week just to get a salary and like benefits. Way worth it. I mean, again, the proof is in the pudding, right? I have not burnt out since I left that last 9 to 5. And why? I think a huge reason is because I've been working from home since then, and because working from home and the low stimulation, but also I'm not doing one thing for 40 hours a week. That appeals to me. I don't even, as I've said before, I don't VA for 40 hours a week here. I VA for about 20 hours a week, and then I mix in the other things. And that has been very fruitful for me. So, but you get to make it look like how you want. Like maybe you are a VA or you're some other kind of service provider. Maybe you're a therapist, this, that, the other thing. And you actually have capacity to work 30 or 40 hours a week doing that thing. That's great. Then that's your out. And you're in private practice and you're doing it that way. So it doesn't have to look like mine. We're all going to have different capacity for what we're choosing to do out here. And also we're going to have different brains for like, do we love doing the same thing? Or do we get tired of that? And we actually want to be juggling a couple of different options of how we're bringing in income, right? So yeah, so that was like the huge light bulb for me as I was reflecting on this video, is that just because you have capacity or just because you have capability to do a role well for a short time doesn't mean your nervous system can sustain it like full time forever, So to be aware of that. And what would happen is I would leave a job, kind of recover some bandwidth, and then I'd feel like, oh, I can go at it again. And then I would get this front facing job again. And then I would just burn out again. So it's like, yeah, had I known, it would have been helpful. So yeah, I think like my advice is if this is you, if you've burnt out multiple times at positions that you're actually good at, and it's super frustrating, you're just like pulling your hair out, like, why is this happening? Please know there's like nothing wrong with you. You're not failing. It's actually probably a nervous system thing. You probably can do the role for a limited amount of time and do it really well, but then you like burn through your capacity and then you don't have any more. And so then you burn out or you collapse, however your nervous system, responds at that moment. And so I think it would be wise to, the other thing is, I think many of us who've been doing that or have done that, we were pushing through our wall of stopping our signals, our body signals. This is another piece of the nervous system education that you learn when you learn it. I learned it from Irene, but it's like your body gives signals for when it's stopping time. But in the 40-hour work week or in a 9 to 5, you're not really allowed to listen to those signals. I mean, sure, you get a lunch break, you can like use the restroom, but it's like, but if your brain and body stop at 6 hours at the computer, you really should stop working that day. You're not going to get that much more done in the 2 hours that you're just like forcing yourself to stay busy, right? We all know this. We've all probably done it in different W-2 roles. So I think that is another problem with like the employee position, is that we're often kind of tied to it in that way where, well, we have to stay here for 8 hours. So even though like my brain and body are kind of like done, I have to keep doing something to be productive, right? And so that wears on a system. So, but when you work for yourself, you can listen to that. Like, that's why I only work like 3 to 5 hours a day as a VA, because that is all my body and mind can do in that capacity, right? Do I like, I like to take care of the cats, or I like to have one-on-ones. Those are different, those are like switching different modes, right? But to work and do admin or be a VA for 8 hours a day, I would be miserable. No, my body would not do that. So like, but you don't start getting sensitive to those signals until you really learn about them. So it's almost like once you have some of the education lingo examples in your brain then starts to notice them in your own, like soma, in your own body, right? So that's what Irene talks about when she's like, a huge piece of nervous system healing or healing your trauma is just the education of it, is learning what's going on in there, right? What does that signal feel like, And so that pushing through the wall and, in an effort to be still productive for the last 2 or 3 hours of your time, that is a big one, So all of that to say, friends, you are not failing. There's nothing wrong with you, but you do need to probably like maybe learn about nervous system itself in your own body, learn about it. I would direct you to Irene Lyon. She has a lot of beginner stuff. I took like a 21-day course. It's like a self-paced course where you learn from the very basics of that stuff. And then she has like a bigger program that I did not do, but I did work with a somatic practitioner for a year. And, that really helped me tune in. So it's kind of ironic because I've said this before, as you grow in learning your nervous system and healing some of the trauma, you actually become more sensitive. So I think you become more sensitive because you're not numbing out and just pushing through. You actually are feeling all of the things. And so, that's why, even though, yeah, that's why it may seem like you have less capacity, because you actually probably never had that much capacity to begin with to work 60 hours or push through, right? You didn't have actually that capacity. You were pushing through your natural stopping point. So all of that. So this was really fun. I really enjoyed like looking back and making that discovery. And I hope it can help you to like notice patterns in yourself. And if you're at that point, if you've gone through the burnouts and if you hear me and you're like, I need out, like, and you're looking to maybe start a side gig or become an entrepreneur or just even figure out what options are for you, that's what my business mentor chats are for. It's just a one-on-one live call, 45 minutes. You bring to me where you're at, what you're thinking of, your problems or questions, and we workshop it together to help give you the next steps, right? So you don't have to go through this alone and figure it out alone. That's what I did. Thankfully I made it out okay, but I don't want you to be alone because back then I didn't see anyone doing it differently. And I definitely didn't see people talking about being a highly sensitive person, entrepreneur, building a business around your nervous system capacity. Like that was not going on in like 2019, at least in my circles of YouTube where I was watching. So, but yeah, there's the link is in the description for the mentor chats. I would love to chat with you and help you along your way. And otherwise, I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for being here.